Oh, yeah. What's up, Internet? Good morning. Today is about getting back to basics. A lot of this is going to be stuff that you have seen me do automatically. It's stuff that I zip through very quickly, and I wanted to take a minute today and talk about that stuff. So if you are brand new to photography, if you're learning this stuff for the first time, if you just got a brand new camera and you're super pumped about using it, but have no idea what to do once the photos get on the computer and it all seems a little bit inaccessible, this stream is for you. Also, I have a stray hair stuck somewhere in my shirt, and it's killing me. Okay. Everything is all set to go. We will dive right in to Lightroom and Photoshop. When you first open up Lightroom, it's going to look like this, right? Except your photos aren't going to have red tags around them. I just pulled these from a much larger set that is like 500 photos. I will say this flat out. There are a billion ways to do this, right? The way that I do works really well for my workflow. What I want to teach you I want to teach you my workflow, not because it is the best workflow, not because it is the only workflow, but the tools that I'm going to be using and the tools that I use are basics that you can then adapt to suit your own needs. So right out the gate, you have a giant photo shoot and a bazillion different photos. And I think the right way to go about this stuff is to look through every single photo. And the key you want to have your finger on right now is the P key. P is flag as pick. If you don't like it, U is unflag. And so every photo shoot starts with me going through pictures one by one, saying, do I like the look? Do I like the exposure? I like her face here, for example, but the way her dress is hanging makes her look unnecessarily thick. So we'll skip it. Pretty strong shot. We can flag that one. We're dealing with the same issue, though. She looks unnecessarily thick. Strong portrait. Notice that it's already flagged because I've already done this for this set. And we just keep going through one by one. This is a strong shot. I really like it. I'm actually going to hit the 6 key to set the label as red. If you right-click on an image, you can set the color label, the rating, or the flag as well. Definitely easier to use the keyboard shortcuts for this stuff. So we keep going through one by one. This is another strong photo. You'll notice it's already flagged. So you've gone through the entire set, and you've got, let's say, 100 photos flagged. We can then click over here where it says no filter and go to flagged. And this will show us our first round of sorting. In other words, we have gotten rid of all the blinks. Those should be unflagged. You don't have to, mark them as bad. That's a waste of time. Instead, now we're looking at round 1 of the good photos. Right? So let's go through here, and we say, oh, I really like this photo. I'm going to give it 5 stars. The way I do this process, you don't need any other stars. You just need 0 stars or 5 stars. And the reason I say that is because the star rating system doesn't... Oh, snap. Thanks for that, host. The star rating system, to me, you only need to mark that it's starred so that we can run another level of filters. So let's say we really like this photo, and it stands out against the rest. We keep sorting, and what we want to do is boil this set down to only the best photos. Now, for the purposes of this tutorial, what I have done is I've actually made them, instead of starring the photos, I have done a color label instead. 6 through 9, 6, 7, 8, 9 are other color labels, and there are more color labels if you need them, including purple. If you hit 0, that sets the rating to 0 and is not a color label. And just as we selected our flagged photos, we can come here and select rated photos. And this is only photos with 5 stars. Now, the issue is, since that's my normal workflow, we're going to see photos, all of these I have already edited before. And so again, for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to turn my filters off, and I'm only going to filter colored images. And the way we can filter colored images is just by clicking the red box right here. Or if we wanted to only see yellow images, we could click the yellow box and not the red box. So these are all the photos that we have picked. Consider these, for the purposes of this tutorial, the best of the best. And from a bazillion photos, we're now down to 5. And I wanted to pick some images that are a mix of overexposed, underexposed, and what I would consider to be severely underexposed. And then shots where we're pretty close, a little bit overexposed here, a little bit underexposed. At this point now, we have our 5 images. And the question is, what do I do now? One of the things that I like to do for all my images is if you hit the I key, it tells you info about the photo. If you hit it again, it will tell you the camera settings that you see in the top left corner. I like keeping those on because I often check back. Let's say I've got 2 really similar photos. I often check back to see whether or not they were caught with the same camera settings or whether the light changed on me. At this point now, we're ready to pull this into the develop console. And you look at all of this and you're like, oh my God, what is all this? It is at first pretty overwhelming to figure out what all this stuff does. But the ones that I keep open, I keep basic corrections open all the time. Whoops. I keep my tone curve open all the time. And when you first get Lightroom, it's going to look like this. You're just going to have hue, saturation, luminance, or all selected. And I end up clicking color over here so that I get it for each color channel rather than each saturation, each luminance, stuff like that. I prefer working with the individual colors rather than working with the individual hue, saturation, and luminance with each color laid out in front of you. We're not going to use split toning. We're not going to use details. I do keep lens correction open. Transform is the only other one you can keep open, but for most, like 99% of shots, you really don't need to use the transform tool. And the reason I say that is because it really, like, adding distortion to shots, even if it's just 2 points, is going to complicate the overall process. And until you know why you're compensating for it, ignore it. In other words, when you get to a point in your photography where you're like, oh man, this is really vertically distorted, I need to correct for that, then use the transform menu. But in the meantime, if you're just getting into photography, you're shooting your friends, you're shooting flowers, your pets, landscapes, buildings, stuff like that, you're probably not going to need the transform tool. It's worth wiggling the sliders and experimenting with it, but then set them all back to 0 and ignore it. What I want to teach, especially today, is how to look at a photo and understand what needs to change. You'll notice that I keep all of the filters and the presets absolutely hidden. We don't need any of that stuff. You can mess around with that on your own time because it's just as easy as clicking a filter and then Lightroom does all the work for you. Similarly, if you just hit auto, you're going to get a nice, pretty well exposed, pretty flat image. We don't want to do that either. What I want you guys to take away from this is how to look at a photo and determine what slider is going to affect your photo correctly. Maybe not correctly, but to the best of your ability. So if we're dealing with portraits, there are a couple ways we can think about this. What is the most important aspect of a portrait? It's the person. So for a lot of photos, for example, this is a great photo. If we brighten the person, let's say we bump the shadows, or we bump the exposure and keep our shadows normal, she looks a little bit closer to being correctly exposed. But the problem is that now we've lost a lot of detail in our sky. So remind yourself again, what is the most important part of a portrait? Is it that the sky is perfectly exposed, or is it that our subject is perfectly exposed? And I would argue that the most important part of a portrait is your subject. But maybe there's some middle ground where we can get a good-looking sky and a good-looking subject. And that's, you know, and that's the goal of this, is it's not just sliding up exposure until you get good-looking skin. Similarly, it's not just sliding up shadows until you get good-looking skin. It's this dance between all of your tone control that's going to determine this stuff. So let's stick on this portrait for a minute. There are a couple different ways that we can adjust these tone controls. If you click on the histogram, you can slide left and right, which adjusts your slider at the same time. What's up, Hell Dog? So I tend to work on the histogram, not because just because it's easier for me to just move over to whites, highlights, exposure, shadows, blacks, than it is for me to go down the list and tweak these on their individual sliders. That's all personal preference. I think for the sake of a tutorial, I'm going to stick to the sliders down here rather than working on the histogram. Histograms are tricky. You are far better off watching a YouTube video on how to read a histogram than me explaining it here on this stream. And the reason I say that is because they will have examples specifically catered towards histogram extremes, whereas these are just photos from a photo shoot from a couple weeks ago, from a week ago. So showing you histogram examples now is not going to explain it well enough. Watch a tutorial on that. It's easy once you understand what it all means. So we want this photo, assess the photo, right? We want the photo bright, but we still like seeing, let's say, like her figure through her skirt. And we still want to save some of this cloud detail. So now it comes down to determining what is in the photo. Ask yourself, is her skin all white? Is it, and not all white as in she is a white woman versus an Asian woman versus a black woman. I mean, is there any part of her skin that the computer will determine is close to true white? Is it at the high end of the brightest brights you could get? Is it, the sunlight hitting my arm here, or is it closer to this color? So if we slide the whites all the way up, we can see that yes, she does change, but we lose so much else. She's probably not in the whites category of adjustments to our tone. Is she in the shadows? I'm going to call it out, yes. Yes, her skin is usually going to fall between shadows, midtones, and highlights. It's a safe bet. For the vast majority of portraits you take, those three things are going to fix or adjust portraits better than any other setting. So, what if we do a combination, right? We determined earlier that shadows and exposure are both going to change our photo and get this a little bit closer to a balanced exposure. What if we do a combination of the two? So we'll bump the shadows pretty heavily. Let's say 55. We'll bump the exposure a little bit. Maybe 0.3. That's looking closer to good exposure on the skin. She's not too dark anywhere, but nor is she too bright, right? The highlights on her shadows or on her shoulder here are not aggressively bright. It's not like this where we're losing skin information. So we've bumped the shadows. If we drop the highlights, we will get some information back in our sky. By and large, for most portraits shot during the day, not necessarily golden hour, but between regular business hours, your sky is often going to be the highlight, and your skin is going to be a midtone and a shadow. So we can really crank down on the highlights. It's at -75 right now, where we're starting to bring back some clouds, and we're starting to see a little bit of detail, but we haven't really affected our subject too much. Right? Her skin is not changing too drastically when we drop our highlights to, -66, which is, again, a pretty drastic change. So we're 2 down, and now all we have left is our whites and our blacks. I would recommend starting with blacks first. If we crank down our blacks too much, you'll notice that in our histogram, we see 2 little triangles, top right and top left. If we click on the triangle, it will show us everywhere that the computer is telling us this is pure black. No color information. You don't get anything out of this. And I really don't want any part of my subject's face being pure black or pure white. I want color information. That's all we get to edit a photo. So let's dial this back, right? We want a little bit of black. Maybe let's go -20. And for the whites, it's the same thing. If we really crank up the whites, all of a sudden the computer is saying, whoa, your entire sky, all of these clouds are pure white. Also, so is part of her clothing. And if we turn this off, we can see that this is all just blown out textureless now. And we don't really want that because there's a lot of good texture in her bikini. Same with over here in her skirt. We don't want to lose all of this because this has really good texture. So let's tune down the whites. We don't need them up that high. Maybe a little bit higher. Okay, so we're losing some sky information. The question, though, is, does it matter? The most important part of a portrait is the subject, not the sky. We still have good separation between what little sky there is and this cloud layer here. I'm okay rolling with that. Again, personal preference, but for the most part, we can get away with keeping our sky bright and our subject well lit. Now for this, I actually want her a little bit brighter, so I'm going to crank up the shadows to 70. And now we're close to a nicely exposed portrait. Again, we're bright, but we're not too bright. And we're dark, but we're not too dark in areas like the corners of her lashes and the backs of her hair. I mean, and if, for example, you see that, you know, she's got a little bit too much brightness right here, let's dial this down until we just barely have, there we go. Now we've got just a tiny bit of white right here and just a tiny bit of white in the sky, but we're still nicely lit. So we're not really crushing any, we're not, we don't have anything that's like true black, and we just have the tiniest little bit in the sky that's considered like pure white. And actually even that we're not there. It's just the blue channel that is all the way off our histogram. Let's talk about white balance for a minute, because if I look at this photo, I think it's too blue. Lightroom gives you a tool, which is the eyedropper tool, where if you click on something that should be pure white, it says, okay, we will officially make that pure white, and it will white balance your photo for you. I think this looks like ass. I would not recommend using the eyedropper tool. I know her bikini is pure white. However, I also know that in making her clothing pure white, it makes everything else look terrible. If we click lower on her bikini, it's going to get it even worse, because lower down in the shadows right here, she's got more blue. Right? If we click on her skirt with her skin showing behind it, it's going to say, well, that's a combination of blue and magenta. So all of a sudden, our photo is too warm and too green. As a result, I would recommend against using the eyedropper tool outright until you really have a good grasp on how to use Lightroom. So instead, what I would recommend, don't even use the slider. Don't touch it. Enter in a value for white balance. Go up in 100-point increments. Go up in 50-point increments. This is set to 5400. What happens if we go up to 5800? Hey, that looks pretty good right off the bat. Just a little bit warmer. As a quick rule of thumb that is completely simplistic, it is missing essential elements. If you go warmer, you can compensate by increasing your tint more magenta to keep your white balance fairly close. If you go cooler, you can keep your tint fairly consistent by going a little bit greener. Again, that is a gross oversimplification. We're talking like 1 point in either direction on the tint slider, not, you know, oh, well, I'm this cool because I want like a nice ice cool photo, and now I'm like right down here. That looks like ass. I don't know what you're doing. Skip all that. We're talking like 1 or 2 points here. So this is default set to 5400. Let's crank it up to 5800. And just for kicks, let's see what it looks like in 6200. 6200 to me looks just fine, and 5800 to me looks just fine. I think 5800 is still a little bit cool. Let's split the difference and go to 6000. Maybe let's crank this up to 4. Little bit of magenta in her skin, little bit of magenta in the photo, but otherwise pretty invisible on the tint slider. And now we've got what looks like human skin in terms of warmth and in terms of temperature and tint. We've got what looks like human skin in terms of our tones, and we're left with everything else in Lightroom. And so the question is, what do I do with that everything else? Well, for starters, we can crop the photo. We can straighten the photo. We can crop the photo. That's a great place to start. You can do this first. You can do this last. Entirely up to you. It is worth looking at every single photo you want to edit through the crop lens. The number one thing I would recommend is clicking this lock, because by default it is unlocked. When it's unlocked, we can crop a photo however we want, but no one wants a photo like this. And as a photographer, your job is to turn over photos that people will use. And no one will use a tall, skinny photo like that unless they tell you that's exactly what they want. So when we go into our crop, it's highly recommended to click this lock. Alternatively, you can hit A, which is aspect, which toggles your lock for you. I would keep it locked just about at all times unless you have a very specific use. When it comes to cropping, the question is, when do you crop? How much do you crop? And why should you crop? Are you removing essential storytelling elements from the photo? Are you cropping vital body parts out of a photo at awkward places? Yes or no, right? I certainly don't want to crop the photo right here because this looks super awkward. But now the question is, if we crop in a little bit and we can straighten this out, are we losing any vital storytelling elements? Well, we're losing some road, but we still have plenty of road. We're losing some of the bend in the road, but we still have some bend in the road. We're losing some of the sign. That's fine. I find that visually distracted. And we're losing some of this sky, which is just empty sky. So are we losing anything by doing that? I don't think so. Now, do we want to crop in so tight that we just see that the road bends and that's it? Up to you. For me, I have no problem cropping in this tight, but it really depends on how you want to tell your stories. Now, if we hold the control key when cropping, it pulls up this ruler. And if we drag our ruler, it will straighten the photo along that edge. So we can identify visual elements in the photo and straighten on those. Or if we open up our crop tool, if we go to the sides, we can rotate however we need, and it pulls up these grid lines so that we can use those as visual references to straighten the photo. I would suggest for every photo you want to edit, look through cropping, look through rotating. Not too much, but again, identify visual elements in your photo. For example, up here we've got a bridge. This is a great example where I might want to crop pretty heavily. Midway through the head to get rid of that bridge. For a photo like this, well, if we crop down so tight to get out of that bridge, we're a little bit close on the head here. You know, you could straighten it, you could really push the envelope here and free up as much headroom as possible. Or you could roll with it. Grab a nice dark line on the bridge, hold control, straighten according to that bad boy, and now you've got some visual framing on top of your photo that's going to push the viewer's eyes down to your subject. Right? Many different ways to crop. It would behoove you to at least explore those options. Now, something I never use in Lightroom, but you can if you want, is the spot removal tool. Spot removal tool is exactly what it advertises. If you grab the result, spot removal tool is difficult to use. I would recommend against any sort of cleanup. If you hit enter, it locks it in place, and then you can click off of it, and it's effectively gone. But I would recommend against doing skin cleanup in Lightroom. All right, let's go back to this photo we are working on. Dehaze and clarity are two sliders that I would absolutely recommend against using in portraits. Clarity especially. No one wants a photo like this. This is disgusting. No one wants a photo like this. This is equally disgusting. It doesn't look good. break yourself of thinking this looks good. If you did, you're wrong. Dehaze is absolutely wonderful if you've got, let's say, a landscape shot. I use dehaze all the time for drone photos. This was dehazed. If you've got a rough-faced person, why not use spot removal in Lightroom? Because I want to break you of the habit of being afraid of Photoshop. Because Photoshop is better at it, and you will get better results in Photoshop, and it's not scary. But a lot of people are scared of it. Okay, dehaze, another very powerful tool, but for portraits, skip it. Skip it until you know what it does. And since this is Babby's first photo shoot in Lightroom, we don't need to worry about dehaze. So much to say that it drastically changes your contrast and also your saturation. And we don't really want that. Now, vibrance and saturation are a tricky mistress. What is the difference between the two? I couldn't actually tell you. Go ask a scientist. Better yet, go ask Google, and it will give you a better answer as to what the two change. I prefer vibrance. It's that simple. For most of my photos, I just bump my vibrance to 15 and call it good. Why I do that? I wish I could be more scientific about this in a tutorial, but to be perfectly honest, I always forget the difference between vibrance and saturation. I believe, and don't quote me on this, saturation affects exactly that. It affects the saturation of the colors, whereas vibrance works with the luminance of the colors. And in this case, it is a global adjustment where you're changing the luminance. Commander, thank you for that follow. Where you're changing the luminance of the colors globally, right? So it's like it bumps all of these, or it tweaks all of these in some specific way. These are your global sliders. So I prefer a little bump to vibrance, 15. Something like that. As I said earlier with histograms, curves seem confusing at first. If you really want to get good with curves, go to YouTube and search for a tutorial on curves. For the most part, a curve is broken up into categories. Here's our curve right here. And you've got this curve line coming straight up at a 1-to-1 slope. Down here, black is this corner here. White is this corner here. And this is midtones. This is highlights. This is shadows. On a curve, the values of a photo can be adjusted in the different sections. Like if I want to adjust the shadows and the midtones, I would grab the curve right here and slide it up or down. If I want to adjust, let's say, the very brightest part of the photo, I would grab the curve here and adjust it up or down. If I want a nice general lightening of the photo, grab it right at the midtones and slide those puppies up or down. And so when we look at our curve here, we can see that it even labels it out for you. We've got midtones, which it calls lights because it's right up here, highlights, lights, darks, and shadows. If we want the whole photo to be a little bit lighter, we can grab our midtones. If we want just the shadowy parts to be a little bit lighter, we can move this up. And notice that our shadows are getting lighter. If we want our highlights to be lower, maybe see if we can pull out a little bit more detail in those clouds. Notice, though, that we're also affecting the skin. So the curve is another means to transform the light in your photo, but they are also more aggressive, more sweeping changes. Contrast in a photo, and in general, contrast is light lights and dark darks. So if we increase our lights and make dark darks, this is a contrasty photo. Now, maybe that's overboard, but what about doing a little bit of contrast? I prefer working with the curve rather than touching the contrast slider, because the contrast slider is doing all of the things at once. It's blacks, it's whites, it's highlights, it's darks, it's midtones, all at once. And that doesn't give me enough control. So, in general, let's just bump the lights a little bit and drop the darks a little bit. You know, let's say we'll do 10, plus 10 on the lights and minus 10 on the darks. What we're doing is we're adding a little bit of S-bend to the curve. Light lights, dark darks, that is the general basis for contrast. And if you just want to give your photos a little bump, you know, what I do is +5 on the lights, -5 on the darks. That's it. Just a little bump, and then we'll take it into Photoshop and we'll really do it. Lens correction is a tricky one. Should you be lens correcting every photo? Up to you. I typically don't. However, there are certain times where it's very helpful and other times where it doesn't make a damn bit of difference. In this photo, if we enable profile correction, what we see is that it doesn't really change any of the distortion. She barely changes, a pixel or two. So we know that this photo isn't heavily distorted. What if we look at a different photo? Is this photo heavily distorted? Right, maybe she's a little bit bubbled in the middle of her face, but for the most part, not too much either. What profile correction also does is it removes some of the vignetting that your lens causes. But in this case, I actually like that this photo is vignetted. I like that we're dark around the edges here. It pushes our eyes closer to our subject. And a dark road, what's so wrong about that, right? So if I were to enable profile correction here, I would absolutely remove the vignetting. I would drop it all the way down to 0, wouldn't even touch it. And in this case, since it's such a minor change in distortion, when I'm zoomed out, I cannot see a difference. As a result, who cares if it's on or not? It's not changing the photo in the least. And if all it does is add this really ugly vignette where you no longer have, I mean, it looks like one of those 1980s Christmas card photos. So if you're going to run profile correction, make sure you are examining what the vignetting is doing. For a photo like this, same issue. I don't mind that it's vignetted because she's smack dab in the middle of the shot. And we're not missing any information by pushing the viewer's eyes towards the center of the photo. So you can skip profile correction for the most part. Effects. I have been a photographer for 12 years. I've never used the effects panel in Lightroom. I couldn't even tell you what it does. I'm not even going to fuck with it. I have no idea what effects does. It clearly is not an essential piece of the kit. Details. You can also safely skip details. Unless you only own Lightroom, skip details. And again, my goal here is to teach you that Photoshop is not scary, but if you work in Photoshop, you will get better results than if you work in Lightroom. Get the global stuff out of the way in Lightroom, right? Get it so that your face looks okay to edit. And then don't do anything more. Don't fuck with the colors in Lightroom. Don't fuck with the luminance in Lightroom. There's no point. Photoshop is going to be the hot jam, and that's where we really want to hang out. You guys with me so far? There comes a point where this becomes second nature. And if you look back through other VODs of mine where we're editing, this shit is so automatic. But it's intimidating at first because there are all these sliders and dials and you don't know what anything is. But for the most part, you can break any photo down with just these 5 sliders. Exposure, highlight shadows, whites, blacks. We don't want to touch contrast. It's just these 5. Do I typically adjust my curves in Lightroom or Photoshop? I typically adjust curves in Photoshop. And the reason I typically adjust curves in Photoshop is 1, their curve slider is easier to use, and 2, I can change the opacity of the overall curves adjustment. And that's huge. Maybe I adjust the curves pretty heavily, but then back off by changing my layer opacity. For me, it's easier to use colors in Lightroom. I understand that. The color slider is very straightforward in Lightroom. I don't have any issue with this, except for the fact that there are some pretty cool things we can do with portraits in Lightroom that require a little bit more fine-tuning. And that kind of gets into masking and stuff like that. So maybe that's not a good 101 tutorial. But for the most part, you know, if you're comfortable working with the color sliders in Lightroom, go for it. I will just say in Photoshop, you have more control and can adjust colors in certain places but not others. But that gets into advanced techniques. Still don't panic. Next, what we want to do. So we have our photo roughly set, right? We have adjusted our temperature and our tint. We've gone through our tone controls. We've bumped the vibrance a little bit. We've added just a tiny little bit of S-bend in our curve to add contrast. We haven't fucked with any colors. And we have enabled profile correction and turned the vignetting all the way down. And we don't even need to enable this since it really doesn't distort our photo very much. We can skip lens correction completely. Now, if you're shooting with like a 24mm lens, you're going to want to at least consider profile correction. This was shot with an 85mm lens, which does not really distort photos that much. And for a photo like this, it's negligible. We have examined the crop of the photo. We have straightened it just the tiniest little bit by holding Control and dragging a line across our horizon. I think we're pretty much good to go in Lightroom. We have exhausted what I want to do in Lightroom. I feel like adjusting white balance using the eyedropper would work better for someone just starting. I wish that were the case, but unfortunately, the eyedropper is often too aggressive. Right? When I look at this photo, I think, 1, this scene did not look like that. And 2, her skin does not look like that. So, right, and we know her bikini is white. This is a white bikini. But to me, it's easier just going up in 100-point increments until it looks right to you. Lightroom is so easy to use, Lady Lion. The problem is that if you are brand new to Lightroom, all this shit is completely overwhelming, right? And they've got everything open. So, like, you look at this, and it's just a laundry list of shit. And you look through it, and you're like, God, what calibration effects? What is all this? And it's overwhelming. So, close these down. Transform, effects, calibration. You hardly ever use them, if ever. Again, I have gone my entire career never once using the Effects tab in Lightroom. And I've been shooting for 12 years. Detail, never used it. Split toning is a tricky one because split toning is a cool tool. However, I do my split toning in Photoshop where I can adjust opacity. Also, a good photographer don't need to crop. You know what? I'm gonna get rid of that comment because that is absolute horseshit. I'm timing you out because you came into my channel and spouted absolute horseshit. What about gradual filters? I prefer using those in Photoshop as well. A good photographer doesn't need to crop. I am going to say this flat out. That is incorrect. You are welcome to your opinion. That is a bad opinion. And I am trying to be diplomatic here, but don't come into my channel and give that kind of shit advice, because it is shit advice. This is a crude example, but I enjoy colors similar to Brandon Woeful style. Everyone does. That guy's killing it. Or extreme adjustments like that. He does that in Photoshop. Will I go over color correction similar to that? We absolutely can. So again, we are ready to pull this photo into Photoshop. I'm going to hit this again. Why am I so offended by someone saying a good photographer doesn't need to crop? There are a ton of photos I shoot with the sole intention of cropping, right? There are certain shots I take where I know that I am going to remove an element from the photo by cropping. However, maybe I'm standing on a bridge and on the other side of the bridge is my subject. And I cannot, like, let's say I'm standing on a bridge and I'm photographing a subject across a river, right? I can't go forward anymore because I'm on a fucking bridge. So if I go further, I will fall into the canyon and kill myself. But my subject is on a ledge on the canyon, right? So maybe my only option is to shoot and then crop in tighter. And now you may well say, well, a good photographer would carry the right lens. Fuck off. Oftentimes, your lenses are limited to your budget. Does that make you a bad photographer? No. No. With the megapixel count right now, not cropping is like giving up on a great feature. I don't know how else to say it except that cropping is an essential part of good photography. One, because you will find yourself in places where you simply cannot move to get a tighter or wider shot. You are stuck in a certain spot to get the composition you want. Two, because oftentimes it's easier to view a photo on a computer rather than on the back of a camera or through the viewfinder, and you may notice extra details that you did not see while in the heat of battle on a photo shoot that you want to remove. So cropping is perhaps one of the most essential parts of good photography, not the other way around. End rant. Right-click your photo. For those of you who have Creative Cloud and are not using an older setup, if you right-click and you go to Edit In, it will allow you to edit in Adobe Creative Cloud, in Photoshop CC. And your Photoshop is going to look drastically different than this. It's going to look something like this, right? Or maybe this is going to be all chunky and the background's going to be white. All this is just customizing. If we grab this menu, we can dock it over here. And then, we've got a library for stock assets, I guess. A lot of this comes down to what windows you want to have open. For me, I have actions that I use all the time, and these actions are very simple. I have my history, and I have my layers, and I've got my tools, and that's it. Again, Photoshop is hugely personal preference, but there are a few tools that do the vast majority of the work. One of the key tools that I would recommend for portraits is right here, the spot healing brush. Now the healing brush, if you hold Alt, you click a source, and then you can heal according to that source. So if we click her belly button, then we heal a belly button, and then Photoshop tries to interpret what the hell you want her belly button being up here for. And clone stamping is the same way. The clone stamp, if you click a source, it will do a direct copy of that source, as long as your opacity is set to 100%. The spot healing brush carries a lot of weight. We can change our brush size using the bracket keys, left and right bracket, if you're not using a tablet. Basically the same tool? No. Clone stamping is a direct copy. If I grab her skirt here and I clone stamp here, it will be, hell, thank you for that, host. You know, we can simply duplicate her with clone stamping. Healing is Photoshop trying to interpret the texture and color of the thing of your source set into the thing you are healing, right? So if clone stamping is direct copy, healing is trying to add that subject into the background scene. This is clone stamping, this is healing. Does that make sense? It's like healing is trying to blend it in. Clone stamping is saying, fuck the blending, it needs to be this thing. Now, the spot healing brush is wonderful because you don't need to set a source. So if you set your right brush size, you just click. You'll notice that the spot healing brush is trying to find good skin. If you're trying to spot heal something complicated and you get weird results, don't try and spot heal over that bad result. Back up. And that's Alt-Control-Z. If you do Alt-Z, it just switches back and forth from your last history state. If you hit Alt-Control-Z, it goes backwards in your history. So for example, up here, we just opened the document. Let's, we'll click out some of these little baddies. Just like that. Maybe get rid of a couple zits on the chin. Let's say for the most part though, we want to keep this simple, right? So we'll just click out some of the blemishes and call that good enough. The other wonderful tool to use is the patch tool. Patching is awesome for areas like this, where there's this long line in her armpit. We can just patch it out. And what we want is we want to grab our patch tool, set it to source and normal. We don't want to use content aware for this. Content aware has a time and a place. I've never found that time and a place. I personally don't think content aware is worth a damn. But for the patch tool, it is very straightforward. We grab an area that we want to fix, and we patch it to an area where we like the texture. Not the color, the texture. Right? So in her armpit here, for example, this is fairly smooth skin. So let's grab some fairly smooth skin. That's pretty close. Is it perfect? No. Would I suggest duplicating the layer to have something backing up too? Yes, absolutely. Remember, the patch tool works on texture. So let's say we've got this big old goobie on her chest, which is actually a beauty mark and we wouldn't remove it, but let's say it is a zit. And we're like, oh, well, let's grab this. Notice that all of a sudden we have bikini texture with skin color. This is the best visualization of the patch tool. Patch tool is wonderful if, for example, she had a tiny little loose thread right here, right? Just sticking off her shirt. And you'll see this all the fucking time. The texture right here is roughly the same as the texture underneath this. So we can grab a little patch, and if we keep it similar, right? I'm going to try and keep that same bikini line right through there, we can just patch that out, and it's effectively invisible. Right, you may see a little jitter here and there. But if you keep your lines similar, Patch Tool is very strong when it comes to edge work. Similarly, we could use the clone stamp. Get our brush size small. We could grab this area, sample right here on the edge, and clone this out, and then we could clone the skin. And we're going to get very similar results. Right? Now, what would not be the correct tool to use for something like this is the spot healing brush. Because the spot healing brush pulls a proximity, or content aware if you want, but I keep it on proximity match. And if we do that, we're going to get weird anomalous results where the algorithm breaks down. Similarly, if we use the healing brush and we try to heal this out, we may get better results since we're picking a source, but ultimately, for something where you've got a difference in texture and color, I would recommend the clone stamp or the patch tool. So, 4 tools will do a huge amount of work in Photoshop. You've got a stray hair here sticking up out of her hat. We've got 4 tools: the spot healing brush, the healing brush, the patch tool, and the clone stamp. Any of those tools would work to get rid of this hair, right? We could use the clone stamp and just pop that out. Notice, however, that we copied her mole, so you want to be careful with that. We could use the spot healing brush and zap that out. But notice that as we get closer with the spot healing brush to the edge, we're going to deal with the same issue, where it's trying to match similar textures and colors, and the algorithm is like, too much information, I can't handle it, so it breaks. Similarly, the healing brush might run into the same issue as the spot healing brush. So here, our choices are either the clone stamp, so we'll grab this darker skin here and clone stamp. That's kind of tough. That doesn't look right. Let's grab some lighter skin. Closer. Maybe we're happy with that. For something like this, I would clone stamp as close to the hat as I feel comfortable. Then I would grab my patch tool and patch out that last little bit. And then if you really want to clean it up and get even texture, grab another patch and kind of hide your tracks. The best piece of advice I can give you: as soon as you open up a photo in Photoshop, Control-J, Control or Command-J for you Mac users. What we're doing now is we're working on a new layer. There are 3, maybe arguably more, but there are 3 main ways to make changes in Photoshop. Some tools will work on transparent layers, which is clicking the blank page here. For example, the spot healing brush will work if you sample all layers, and you can do that on a transparent layer if you want. Things that won't work on a transparent layer, the patch tool won't do shit. Spot healing brush won't do shit unless you're sampling all layers or current and below. So some tools work on transparent layers. Sometimes you work on full information layers. If you want, so let's say we're doing a bunch of spot healing. Let's say we're healing out her armpit here, and we've got that cleaned up pretty much the way we want it. You know, we've got everything gone, and now we want to do something where we know we're going to tone down the opacity of whatever it is that we're going to do next. So, you know, let's get this roughly the way we want it. I switched to my tablet just because it's a little bit faster for me to do these quick brush strokes. All right, so we've got her skin kind of cleaned up. Notice this hair is back. And now I'm like, you know, I'm going to switch to a completely different section of the body, a completely different tool, and I want to work on a full information layer. Alt, Control, Shift, E. What we're doing is we're holding Alt and we're grabbing this menu and merging visible. Alt Control Shift E is a full information layer, otherwise known as merging up. I've noticed you use clone stamp to cut hair or similar things. So here, for example, let's say we want to get rid of all this hair. We like this big, we like this big chunk right here, but we don't like all this crapola. What you could do is you could come in here with your clone stamp and individually stamp out every hair. Right? And then rebuild all of this. Alternatively, what you could do is use your clone stamp and cut this into manageable little sections. Do your detailed edge work where you really don't want any distractions from the edges with the clone stamp. And then we can grab our patch tool, come in here, and just patch out those chunks just like that. Now, if we were to do that without clone stamping, if I was to try and come in here and patch that out, notice how we get this weird hazy blobby blur? I'll zoom in so you can see the difference. So let's clone stamp and cut our edges. Is it to speed up editing? No. It is to prevent. So this is patch tooling out a section. Notice how this is much closer to our sky color. What's happening is if you don't give yourself enough room on the patch tool to maneuver, what's happening is right here, for example, the patch tool is trying to interpret patching pure white against a dark edge. I could include the edge and also include the edge in my patch, and then we'll get better results. But notice that then I would have to include this edge. If you want good edges, you have to include the edge in the patch. If I want all the edges, that's fine for the hat edge, but not this edge. So patch tool is great for edge work and texture, but it's not good for transitions of things. So instead, again, we'll cut the transition between hat and hair, and down here between hair and hair, and then we'll give ourselves a smaller section to work with. Now we can grab our patch tool, and notice there's no transition anymore. It's just color to color, and you'll get much better results that way. That is using the clone stamp to cut down a selection. So remember that creepy hair, creeping hair, sneaky hair over here? Here we can cut this down into much smaller sections. Then grab our patch tool. Just like that. And there you'll get great results removing that stray hair. So, clone stamp and patch tool often go together, and then healing brush or spot healing brush, whichever you prefer, also often go together. Could we talk about adjustments to making either the chin smaller or the forehead smaller? I would avoid that stuff. I would really avoid that stuff because what you're dealing with is a pretty gnarly tool, which is the Liqufy tool. So I just made a brand new layer, Alt Control Shift E. Like, we can go in here to filter and Liqufy, and this is the tool where you can gooby up all the different things and really have a grand old time dealing with Liqufy and making stuff silly, and you can and really Instagram filter the shit out of it, right? But if we're talking about minute adjustments to someone's chin, this is the hardest thing in Photoshop to make look good. What you're asking is the Liqufy tool. Yes, that is the tool you want to use. It's in Filter, Liqufy, but I would avoid the Liqufy tool for a long time. Liqufy is an incredibly powerful tool. It is also the easiest way to fuck up a photo like that. Okay, the only other tool I want to talk about when it comes to basics is the dodge tool. We have a full information layer. There's nothing on it. We're going to grab the lollipop. The lollipop is set to mid-tones at 5%. If you want for this, you can turn on protect tones. I think for your first go around, keep protect tones turned on. By working on your angles, what he means is like if you don't want someone having a huge chin, don't like shoot up at them, right? You know, and if someone has like a lot of extra chin skin, make sure that when you're shooting them, you don't see that. Work on your angle of the camera to the subject is my interpretation of what someone means when they say work on your angles. Yeah, camera angles, not like work on setting up angles in the photo to hide a chin or something like that. No, it's like work on where you are in relation to the subject. Dodge tool. Why am I talking about dodge tool? The dodge tool is one of the most powerful tools for working on portraits in your arsenal. It is part of the big three that I use. The big three that I use. Spot healing brush. Sorry, big four. Spot healing brush, clone stamp, patch tool, dodge tool. If you hold Alt, the dodge tool becomes the burn tool. Now, what does this tool really do? At 100%, the dodge tool makes something lighter, right? So we can dodge in a smiley face. Notice that there's still texture underneath here, but what we're doing is it makes anything lighter. And we can use it to make dark things lighter, but at 100% it's very aggressive. Now the burn tool, so that you don't have to switch from dodging to burning, if you hold Alt while dodging, it makes things darker. This is all a little bit bright here. We could burn this, but that's so aggressive. Instead, 5%. And we're going to come here. Oh, another great thing. If you double click the hand, it fits your photo to the screen. If you double click the magnifying glass, it zooms to 100% of the photo, or the photo at 100%. So like the actual pixel size. If you hold Alt with the magnifying glass, you can zoom out. The other thing, I prefer the click to drag zoom in feature. I hate scrubby zoom. Scrubby zoom, if you click and move left or right, you can zoom in, but I hate it. So I turn scrubby zoom off, and instead I use select zooming to get to an area. Now, something that all portraits have, bags under the eyes. This is not an eye bag. This is the shape of her eyeball. That's not an eye bag. The eye bag comes down here. This is eyeball, eye socket shadow. We want to fix this one, not this one. So how do we do that? Easiest tool for this, dodge tool. We can come in here. Remember, it's set to 5%. And we're just going to start dodging areas that are a little bit too dark. What about right here? Right on her cheek line. We can soften this so that it's not quite so aggressively dark. We can come in here around the nose as well, and we're just dodging. That's it. What about here where her nose is bright? Well, let's hold the Alt key, and we can just burn ever so slightly. And it doesn't really look like we're doing anything, but let's turn that on and off. And now you look at that and you're like, wow, that's really aggressive. Good. Turn your layer opacity down. This is why we're working on another layer. And what we're left with is a fairly invisible change where all of a sudden the bags under her eyes are significantly lighter. And you can adjust your layer opacity to change how much you're dodging and burning. Right? Let's say we want it at 33%. So there's still a hint of eye bags, but they're softer. Dodging and burning is one of the most powerful tools. And so I would recommend start a brand new layer, Alt-Control-Shift-E or Alt-Command-Shift-E, grab your dodge tool, set it to 5%, and just explore where the dark parts of a photo are, and we'll make them a little bit lighter. Now, in showing you this method, I will say there are a billion different ways to dodge and burn. My method is fast, but it's dirty. There's no going back if you make a new layer after you dodge this way. There are other non-destructive forms. They still use the basic concept of the dodge brush, of the dodge tool, which is some dark parts need to be lighter, or the burn tool, which is some light parts need to be darker. Right? And if skin is this mismatched like lights and darks, and you want even skin, you bring them together. Why do I do it like that? There are several schools of thought in retouching. On the whole, a photo retoucher is in some ways a different profession than a photographer. And this is pretty important, right? Here, I am the photographer. I am also the retoucher. But you will run into people on Instagram who are absolute masters at Photoshop, Lightroom, Capture One, any of these programs to manipulate photos, and they edit other people's photos for money as a profession. If I am a photographer hiring a retoucher, I trust that person not to fuck up my photo, but maybe they don't exactly know my tastes. Maybe it's only the first time they've ever retouched a photo for me. There are ways to edit a photo where all the changes you make can be adjusted, right? So when I, paid retoucher, give you, the photographer, your photo back, I say, hey, if the colors are too aggressive for you, you can tone them down on the color slider, right? Which is going to be its own layer. Or if the skin retouching is too heavy, well, you can tone down my frequency separation folder, and that will give you a more natural look. Now for me, since I am the same person, photographer and retoucher, and I'm not turning anything over to anyone else besides the client, I sure as shit don't want my clients fucking with my edits, because they don't know what any of this stuff is. And if they do, I still don't want them fucking with it, because it's my copyright protected work, and like my intellectual property. On some level, you want to either offer your client the ability to change the things you're doing, or not change at all the things you're doing and set them in stone. So, like, why would you do something destructively if you can do it non-destructively? Ease, efficiency. You know, I'll give you an example. In Lightroom, when we were editing this photo for our subject, I turned over 23 images. This set took me 3 days worth of work. If, let's say, an image takes anywhere between 40 minutes to an hour and a half to edit, we're looking at anywhere between 12 and 24, 26 hours to turn over this many photos. So at some point, I have to say, I am working efficiently. I am doing things that may be destructive as a time-saving method. And at the end of the day, you have to answer for yourself, and this is deeply personal. Am I changing something to get the job done, or am I changing something to do it the right way? Right? And if there are a billion different ways to edit photos, you have to find whichever way works for you that also gets the job done. Since there are a dozen different ways to dodge and burn, the way I prefer is like the quick dirty way. But if I were to show that to like a professional retoucher, they look at that and they're like, "Oh my god, what the fuck is he doing? He's ruining it. He's fucking up the photo. I'm out. I quit. I can't look at this." There are so many ways to do it. Right here, for example, this bruise on her leg. We can grab this layer and just dodge that out. And it's done. How much longer does it take to do it the right way? Depends on how right you want to be. It depends on how thorough you want to be in, keeping things light. Here's another great example. Do I want to take the time to label my layers? Oh, no fucking way. Now, if I were turning this over to a client, you bet your ass I would have to label my layers. Otherwise, how do they know what anything does? So there are so many different ways to do this. And you have to ask yourself, am I doing this for me, or am I turning over the retouching to someone else? If you're doing it for you, you can get away with more shortcuts. You can get away with not doing it the safe way if you want. Or if you want to be super safe, then go on to YouTube and look for like non-destructive dodge and burn techniques. How often do I turn over a PSD file? In my entire career, I have turned over 2 PSD files, which did not go to the client. They went to the graphic designer who the client had also hired. Every once in a while, you'll run into a client who wants a lossless image, like a TIFF or a PNG, where they don't want to deal with any JPEG compression or anything like that. Very few and far between. The vast majority of clients with whom I have worked don't get into that stuff. They just want their pictures, and they want to see the pictures on the phone as soon as they open the email because they're super excited. I don't even send out full res to clients because most people have no use for a photo this big. What if you want to change it later? Either you have to, like the way I retouch, I would have to start from scratch or try and like bodge my way through the change. But for the most part, the way I edit requires perfection at every step, right? It has to be perfect before I move on to the next layer. How often does it happen that people turn back a picture and tell me to redo it? Very, very, very rare. What is more common is, let's say, for example, because I think we pulled out a birthmark right here, right on her chest. By the way, I'm holding the Alt key and I'm clicking the eyeball on my background layer. The background layer is the original layer. I'm clicking the eyeball to turn off all the layers. This is our original photo, and this is where we are now. Okay, so we pulled out these 2 beauty marks on her chest. And let's say she's like, "Oh my god, that was my favorite beauty mark." Then what I'll do, realistically, because that is the extent of like revisiting a photo for me. No one has ever come back to me and been like, "Yo, this looks like ass. What did you do? Fix it again." Right? So either we can just take our history brush and like history brush in those 2 birthmarks, or what I might have to do is go into Lightroom, grab the original photo, because we're working with a copy right now, and just open it up in Photoshop and cut and paste. I've had to do that as well. I remember editing a photo of a fellow who had a scar on his forehead, but it wasn't very pronounced. It was like barely visible, right? So I edited it out. And he's like, "Yo, where's my scar? Like, I need that in because I get work based on that scar," as it turns out. I was like, "Okay, cool. No big deal. I could barely see it in the photo, but I'll put it back in just so it's there." Right? So I had to go back into the original photo, copy and paste the scar, and just put it back in. By the way, anyone serious about retouching? Get a tablet. Get a tablet with a jog wheel on it. That is the single most important kit when it comes to retouching. Monitors are important too. How to use the Liqufy tool. Fuck, man. Liqufy. Can I talk about eye retouching? Yes. Okay, look. We'll go into the Liqufy tool, and I'm just going to show you what it does. Let's say, for example, the Liqufy tool has 3 main tools that you will use. All of these over here on the left, like the swirl, the bulge, the pinch, I don't even know what the fuck this thing is. Shows how much I've used it. Yeah, I never use those. We use the push, we use the reconstruct, and the mask. The mask tool, let's say, for example, we want to push in this edge right here. So we can use the mask and paint her bikini, because I don't want to change her boob shape. I just want to knock back that cutlet. And then there's also erase mask. I guess 4 tools that we use. We just want to push back the cutlet a little bit. Then we grab our push tool, and I have my push set to low pressure and low density. And now let's mask this off a little bit more. Good. Now we have a big old brush, and I'm just pushing in with the Liqufy tool. This is the main use for the Liqufy tool, is pushing in edges, or in some cases, pushing out edges. Right? Let's say, for example, that she is muffin top. She's not muffin topping, but like this is really cutting into her because it's too tight. We can just push that out to match. The Liqufy tool is not so much a weight loss tool as it is. I'll tell you where I really use Liqufy, not in really changing our subject, but notice that, like, see how she's got this sharp edge on her skirt here? We'll just push that in a little bit. Right there. It's really killer when you've got thick fabric that has folded and left a bump, to just tuck that in. Make it smooth again, right? See where this folded? Let's say this folded out more like this. And you see that all the time. Let's see if I have another example. See these little bumps right here on the edge of her arm? We could easily Liqufy those smooth. So again, use Liqufy, but notice what's happening. Let's say there was a severe bump right there. Notice what's happening to our detail. And this is why I am really cautious to show you guys Liqufy right out the gate. Right? Okay, so cool. We fixed her trap right there. And we fixed here. But now we're left with this. And you know when you're looking at Instagram and you see someone with a giant old booty and the tiniest little waist, and you're like, okay, this is clearly fake, right? And you see that the bathroom counter is all wiggly behind him. Liqufy, that's Liqufy. So what I want is to give you guys the tools to do the majority of stuff. Liqufy is such a... I'd Liqufy 1 in 80 photos. Why did we go over patch tool and clone stamp and healing brush? So that when you Liqufy and you get this bullshit texture after liquefying, you can come in here with your patch tool and fix it. It is the most aggressive tool, Lazarus. And it's like so aggressive that it's critically unforgiving for new users. Right? So we patched that out. We fixed that thing. And now we can take our clone stamp and come in and really clean up the edge. Just like that. Now we can patch again if we really want to be perfect with it. And there's your Liqufy. But yeah, for the most part, keep it simple. And the simple tools are the patch tool and the spot healing brush, dodging and burning, set to 5%, and the clone stamp. That's really it. And all these are in basic ass Photoshop. No bye-bye bingo arms. That's true. but such a rare case, right? So that's really all you need to truly clean up a photo. Let's talk about common adjustment layers. If we click this little black and white thingy, the black and white circle, it pulls up your adjustment layers. Brightness contrast, skip it. We'll work with the curves. And remember, this is the same curve. We've got our blacks and our shadows, our darks to our midtones to our highlights, and our highlights to our whites. If we want the whole thing to be brighter, we can just drag up from the midtones. But what if we want to add a little bit of contrast? Well, contrast, let's get rid of that point. Contrast is dark shadows and light lights. And now you look at that and you're like, oh man, that's kind of cool, but it's like a little bit too aggressive. Okay, so let's lower the opacity. What if we run it at 50%? That looks pretty solid to me. Ceramner, will you link us to a tutorial on masking? For everyone who looks at what I just did and is about to ask, what is that white box? I want you to watch a tutorial on masking. I keep saying, this is the most powerful tool. No, this is the most powerful tool. No, this is the most powerful tool. Masking is top tier, most powerful. Is it the most powerful? Arguably, yes. In a nutshell, masking allows us to change certain things of a photo and keep others the same. Let's say I really want to change the grass color in this photo. So we can open up our hue and saturation and we can say, well, the grass is green. So we grab our green channel and we saturate the shit out of it. Well, maybe that's too aggressive. Okay, so let's like actually make this try and look good, okay? And then we work with the hue a little bit. And we're like down here, maybe we want some like kind of muted tones. But none of this is changing. Why isn't any of this changing? This is grass, but the only thing that's changing is this crap back here. I don't like that. I don't care about that. I wanted to change this grass. I want next to her to be greener. But I thought I'm working on the greens, and that's not green. Surprise, dickface. That's a yellow. If we change the yellows, oh, now it's changing. But so is she. So is every other fucking green in the photo. Or every other yellow in the photo. And as you can see, there's a lot of what the computer thinks has some yellow in it. So let's say we bump up the saturation a little bit. And we're going to make this a little bit more dead brown, right? We really like fall colors. And we don't want to ruin her or any other part of the photo. So imagine, if you will, that masking covers the entire photo with masking tape. A white mask means you are looking at your entire canvas with no tape on it. If I hit Control or Command I and invert a white mask, now the entire photo is covered with masking tape. If I use a white paintbrush, I am effectively using a knife to cut out that masking tape. So what we can do is, if I want my changes to only appear in certain areas, on a black mask, I paint with white to change the color of a thing, right? Or let's say, for example, I want to really change the contrast of the background. I really want it dark with just a little bit of light in there, right? But that really fucked her up. We can cover the whole canvas in black masking tape, and then with our white paintbrush knife, just cut out the sections that we want super duper dark. And maybe, this is too aggressive. That looks blobby and weird. So now we can come in and dial back our opacity, but maybe only 25%. Now we just have darker bushes, and that's it. That's the power of masking. And it is very, very useful. For example, who asked earlier, retry brine. Can I talk about eye retouching? Let's work on a brand new layer. I am going to make a black layer mask by holding Alt and clicking the layer mask button. If I hit the backslash key above Enter, you'll notice that everywhere in the photo turns red. And I believe when Photoshop first opens, the red is at like 50%. The red shows me everywhere in the photo that is covered in masking tape, right? And if I hit the backslash key, I can see everywhere where I have cut out that masking tape. Or alternatively, everywhere where we have changed the contrast. Now, what I would recommend is right-clicking the mask, going to Mask Options, and setting this to 15%. Let's work on her eyes. I only want to change her eyes in this photo. I'm going to hit backslash. I'm working on the mask. I'm going to grab a white brush, and with a teeny tiny brush, I'm going to mask in only the colored portion of her eye. Now let's, for the sake of simplicity, let's just grab the whole section here. Let's say we're really sloppy with our brush work, and we did this. Now I can click on the layer. We can go here to Image, Adjustments, Curves. I want to brighten her eyes. So I'm going to grab the curve between the shadows and the midtones and lighten them up. And now that we see what we're doing, we can come back to our mask. We don't even need to come in here. We can just grab a black brush and retape, and it's retroactive, right? So anywhere we cover with black paint is going to be invisible again. That change is going to be invisible. So we can come in here and we can clean up our mask. I'm also going to mask off her pupils. I don't want those to be brighter. I want to keep those dark. You see this in a lot of photos, just about every photo, right? And so now the only thing that we've changed is the areas that we painted white on a black mask. Now, for me, that's too aggressive. That looks photoshopped. So we'll blend that in at, let's say, 33%. So now we get lighter eyes. Now, when I'm editing eyes, I actually do a two-part process. Here is, I'm going to open this other photo and show you what I do when I edit eyes. We'll copy our background layer. We'll add a black mask by holding Alt and clicking the Layer Mask button. If you just leave your eyes as those super bright anime clown eyes, it looks absolutely bizarre. Because no one really this girl has what you would consider to be stunning eyes. So let's clean up the mask. X switches between our foreground and our background. And this is very helpful when masking. So I just painted white on a black mask. I haven't done anything yet. I'm just getting the mask ready. Now I'm going to switch to black, and we're going to cover her pupils back up with masking tape. And I'm just going to clean up my edges now. We're going to leave a dark edge around the eye. Just like that. Now I can hit backslash again. We'll click back on the layer. So, right, like you look at this photo and you're like, hot damn, those are some green eyes. Control M. We're going to open our curve again, and we can really lighten these puppies up, right? But some people leave it like that. And you look at that and you're like, oh, something smells like photo shit. This is no good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to Control J, copy that layer completely. We just duplicated everything we just did. And on the top, I'm going to go to my layer adjustments, and I'm going to soft light the top layer. Now that's still bullshit. It's not good enough. So the bottom layer, we brighten the hell out of the eyes. The top layer, we're soft lighting that same exact thing, and then I'm going to blend them both in at 33%. Now what we're left with is brighter eyes that still have essential contrast to them, right? So here's our brightness, and here's our contrast. Up close, here's what that looks like. Brightness layer, contrast layer. Stack them together, it looks fairly subtle. That's not an aggressive eye change. Do I always blend both layers the same percent? No. For example, if someone has brown eyes, oftentimes the contrast layer will just swallow everything up, right? So typically what you'll see me do, if someone has very light eyes, I will keep them roughly the same. Your range here is about 25% to 45%. That's kind of like, that's the amount of swing I have. So if someone has dark brown eyes, I'll run the soft light layer at like 25% and the lightness layer at 40%. And here's what that looks like when someone has very bright eyes. Right? So that's pretty aggressive. If someone has very, very light eyes and they are looking at the sun, hold on. I have the exact photo to show you. Here, all I did was add a soft light layer to her eyeballs. I wonder if it's even needed. Probably not. What I did actually is I made her eyes darker here. I added more contrast to her eyes. So if someone has very, very, very light eyes and they are looking directly at the light, maybe you're running your soft light layer at 40%. And your brightness layer at 25%, which is still giving you that really good contrast, but you're not actually making the eyes that much lighter, right? I mean, there's definitely something going on, but these puppies aren't just glowing now. Do I use high pass filter for more texture? Not for eyes. Eyes have absolutely beautiful texture in them right out the gate. You don't need to. If you just do a curves layer, I'm going to set these back to 33% each. A curves layer, and then on top of that curves layer, a soft light layer, you will get enough detail in the eyes that a high pass layer is almost unnecessary at that point. Here's a high pass layer. Brand new full information layer. We're going to go to Filter, Other, High Pass. Let's run this at like 6. We're going to soft light the high pass over top. I noticed, well, what I just did was ran a high pass filter. Whoa, too close. I ran a high pass filter over the whole photo. And I just want it to be on the eye. We already masked off the eye. If I hold Alt, I can just drag the mask. So now it's just on the eyes. So this is high pass filter on the eyes. If you ask me, now we're getting into like that looks fake territory, which is crazy because I mean her eyes are already so damn detailed. We don't have to do this much to them. This is excessive to me. Even if we scale it back, let's say we run all three of those at 33%. I mean, that's okay. That's still it's kind of pushing it. So you want to be a baller, and someone told you that split toning is the way to go. How do you do split toning? What is split toning for that matter? Split toning is assigning color values to different tones. In other words, like assigning blue, what's the split tone everyone's using these days? It's like teal and orange. So assigning a teal color to your darks and assigning an orange color to your highlights. We're going to come down here to our adjustments, and I'm going to grab a gradient map. And it's going to look bizarre at first. So let's say we want orange highlights and blue shadows. Now that we've run our gradient map, we can soft light this. This is effectively a split-toned image, right? We are running blue shadows and orange highlights. And It can work if you want heavily filtered images. You can dial it back. You can run it at 50%. So you get something kind of like that. Or reverse it. Now we've actually got blue highlights and orange shadows. At 100%, at 100%, it looks like that. Right? What are some other common split tones? Purple. Like a nice lavender and a gold. Purple gold is one I use all the time. We'll go to gradient map. We'll soft light it. And now we get really nice purple shadows and gold highlights. And now that still makes skin look a little bit funky, but that's a little bit closer. And if we dial it down to 50%, this is a split-toned image with purple and gold. Right? So that gives you an idea. Now we can even take it a step further and say, well, I don't really want her eyes to be purple or her face, so I'm coming in with a black paintbrush and I'm masking off her face. Now everything but her face is purple and gold. Right? What if we don't want her arms to be purple either? We can paint her, we can mask her back off. So now everything but her skin has now been split toned. This is the power of masking. We can go one step further. This is the mask over the entire photo. If I grab my gradient, up here, the default gradient is black to white. So if I grab a black to white gradient and drag it across, notice that we're affecting certain parts of the image, right? Down here is purple, but down here is not purple. Let's crank this up to 100% so it's really obvious. Right? Half of the photo has a gradient on it. Maybe I like that, maybe I don't. Instead, grab color to transparent gradient. Now what I can do, let's say I'm working on a black mask. Now if I only want the road to be purple, I have a white to transparent gradient. Let's drag that right up here. Maybe a little bit in the bushes. We can grab a circle gradient now and hit these bushes without going into her. Now we get purple road and purple bushes, but not much else is changing. Let's say now we want to run like a green-blue gradient. So we'll get some teal and a nice kind of yellow-green grass color. Now let's go here to gradient map. Soft light. We'll invert this. And now we can come in here. And I'm just using a circle gradient to make a bunch of little tiny circles right there. Right? We could do something like that. And then again, 100% maybe aggressive. What about 15%? Just little hints of color. 25 maybe even better. And up close, if we dial down that purple too to like 30%, now you have a subtle shift in color where your grass is a little bit greener and your shadows are a little bit more purple, but you're not really fucking up the whole photo with color. So you can use masks like a scalpel to apply only the right changes where you want them. You can do some really complicated things with masks. For example, a photo like this, These little pops of red, there's purple here in our shadows, there's blue in our water, there's green in our fields behind her. All that was masked in. Here's what this photo looks like out of the camera. The image on the left is the camera raw image. The image on the right is that same raw image processed in Lightroom. And then if we switch, these two photos now are identical. There's no before and after for the Photoshop file, unless I went in afterwards, because we made a copy, and unless I tweaked the shadows in the post-edited folder, these two are going to be the same. But what you can see is how much L, by the way, is kill the lights. So you can have a black background or a gray background. I can see how much the raw image changes to Photoshop, and I can see how much the Lightroom color-corrected image changes to Photoshop. So you can see that we're getting a lot of new color introduced into the photo between Lightroom and Photoshop. And some of this is not color that would come out by adjusting the color sliders in Lightroom. Some of it is digitally added. Here's another great example. We really zazzed up the yellow in this. Now, that original yellow is because there was a flower petal in front of the camera lens. Similarly with this, these green streaks are from plants in front of the camera. More flower petals in front of the camera. Barely any color change. Where we did change the color, though, is right here. We countered the yellow with some purple. And a lot of skin cleanup as well. But for the most part, the skin cleanup we do are the main tools that I told you guys about. Spot healing brush, patch tool, dodging and burning. With those tools, you can do a hell of a lot of work. How do you fix little color change after the dodge and burn tool? That's a huge one as well. If you are not satisfied with protect tones, if it's not doing enough for you, let me get rid of that high pass. All right, so let's say, for example, right here. Let's say I want to get rid of some of the redness. We can use our dodge tool to dodge this a little bit lighter, but what we've got now is light pink instead of light red. All right, well, let's blend our dodge in a little bit. We'll run the dodge at 50%, but we still have just kind of the wrong color. Brand new layer. Grab our paintbrush. Drop the opacity to 15%. Grab a nice color that you like. Maybe this brown right here. Paint over the area with your 15% brush. You know, you can grab some other colors too, maybe more skin tones. And set your layer to color. Now that's super subtle, so I'm going to zoom way in on it. What we just did is dusted over a very light coat of makeup. Now, when I'm editing bags under the eyes, in a very real capacity, you know, we'll dodge this out right here. And you can see, you know, kind of once you get the hang of things, you can see how fast you can really go. So just as a quick real-time tutorial now, we'll hit this whole section. Both bags, both eyes. Blend that in, let's say 55%. Eye bags are gone, but now the color is weird. Transparent layer, grab our brush, 15% opacity. This right here, really good skin color. Right here on the bridge of the nose, I love that color. We can come in here. Let's grab some lighter color here, right here. paint out everywhere that we dodged and burned. We are effectively hiding our tracks right now. Color blending mode. Blend to taste. 45%? Maybe let's dial down the dodge and burn layer as well to 45%. They don't have to be the same. Maybe that's still too aggressive. 25%. Ollie, what is up? Now, there's one other technique that I often do. When I'm using a transparent layer, I set my brush type to screen, which is Alt-Shift-S, and then I paint my colors on. There is debate that that doesn't actually do anything, setting the brush to screen. I find it a little bit easier for me to see kind of how things are really going to change. The reason being is that if I set this to color, it doesn't matter what my brush is set on. The brush can be set on normal, the brush can be set on screen, and you will get the same results. I have a little bit easier time with screen brushing than I do with normal brushing, even at 15%. And you can do the same thing, like right here on her nose, for example. I like this shine, but it's got a little bit of purple in it. So let's just brush some of that purple. Set our layer to color. And up close, you'll notice that we've knocked out some of those purple shades. Screen brushing is pretty advanced. I think, you know, if you skip it and you're just careful with how much you dodge and burn, you will still get great results. So what I want to do is I want to grab, this is like a really nice standard portrait. I have not touched this photo yet. And what I want to do is apply all of these things we have just discussed in real time at real speed. So, first and foremost, what I'm going to do, crop this bad boy down a little bit. She is already centered in our frame. Let's just put the icing on the cake and get her dead center. Crank up the temperature. Let's go to 5200. And I'm going to make it a little bit more magenta. Maybe let's go up to 8. Good skin color. She's still a little bit bright. I'm going to start by dropping the exposure a tiny bit. We'll go just down 0.1. I'm going to bump the shadows a tiny bit. Maybe only 20 points. Where we're really seeing that is down here around her neck and maybe in her eyes. Next, I'm going to really drop my highlights. 75. Have I ever used Capture One? Yes, though I do not own it myself. Get some black. Adjust our blacks. We'll drop our blacks, make them darker. And I'm just going to bump the whites a tiny bit. 15. Here's where we started on the left. Here's where we are now. Let's bump the vibrance a little bit. Hi. Are you taking off?
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Do I have any opinion about it? Capture One is incredibly robust. It is absolutely top tier software. It has a very steep learning curve, but if you can conquer that learning curve, it is incredible. Little bit of adjustment to our tone curve. I have a package? Oh, it's my underpants. That's right, chat. I order underpants online. Enable profile correction, but I'm going to drop the vignetting all the way down. I like how this photo is vignetted, but there is a little bit of shift in the distortion. Yeah, don't be mad. Capture One is like beast level. I don't know how else to describe it. For what I do, and like for your everyday run of the mill raw corrections, I think Capture One is like too much choice, too much customization. But if you're working with like production studio quality gear and you're shooting for like overstock.com, Capture One is like your industry standard for stuff like that. So, for everyday run of the mill photography, Capture One is probably going to be too much. Lightroom is fine. Lightroom is also significantly cheaper. This photo, by the way, so here's where we started, right? Pretty photo. Maybe we're a little bit too warm. I think I'm going to crank this down to 5,000 and drop my tint to 6. That looks better to me. This photo is now ready for Photoshop. So let's pull it in, edit in Adobe Photoshop. Let's get rid of all these other distractions because we were just kind of tooling around with those. Step 1. Always and forever, Control J or Command J if you're one of those Mac users. Copy your background layer. We're going to start with our spot healing brush. I have rebound the spot healing brush to Q, and I have rebound the patch tool to W because I use those all the time. And since I play the video games, I'm used to having my hands kind of like at WAS and D, WASD. So I'm used to having my hands in like the top left corner of the keyboard from video games. So I rebound a lot of the common Photoshop tools that I use almost to like video game controls. And a lot of people don't think about that, but like I think the default for healing brush is J. Who the fuck? Why over there? And a note about social media. I'm running two lives at once. And I'm running 2 Twitters and 2 Instagrams at once. The main Instagram that I had was my portrait Instagram. When I started the drone company, since it was a brand new drone company, I swapped over. I gutted all the portraits off my main Instagram that's like at 15.5K. And I made that the drone company Instagram for the sake that it's easier to launch a business that already has a social media following. I also know that on Instagram, photos of babes will grow in Instagram faster than photos of golf courses. So for me, it was easier to swap my old portrait page to the drone page and rebuild and regrow the portrait page than it would be to have to start the drone company from scratch. I hope that makes sense. Let's get back to editing. Layer 1. I'm going to make my brush pretty small, and we're just going to zap out these stray hairs. And this is, in real time now, me working on this photo. No more like tutorial. This is actually the process that I do when editing. Right here, for example, we're going to use our clone stamp, as we described earlier, to cut this hair, patch tool to the very edge, and grab that section. That was a bad patch. Let's go the other way. Much better. Here again, clone stamp to cut, patch tool. We'll get that hair all the way out of the nostril. Spot healing brush to clean up and hide our tracks. Clone stamp to re-add the shadow in the nose. Turn that layer off and on. Check your progress. Zoom out. Make sure you don't have any weird artifacts left over from where you were working. Looks pretty good. We have the very tip of her hair right here. These 4 pixels. Patch tool. Patch them out. Also, my main Twitter is Mike Larimore, which if you guys like this stream, you want to see more of this stuff, that Twitter, the Mike Larimore one, is where I post stream announcements. For the most part, my streams always go out at 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific, 1800 GMT. Patch tool. Clone stamp. I can shut the fuck up if these are, if me calling out the tools is useless. I don't have to do that. Patch tool. These hairs don't bug me one bit. I can safely leave those in. This, however, now we're getting into the tricky shit. Definitely call out the tool. Okay. Clone stamp. We're going to cut this hair over her eyeball into manageable sections. Out here, one more clone stamp to cut. Patch tool now. That was a bad patch. Patch it out. Scoot back, zoom in, enhance. It looks like that was a bad patch. No, don't be mad. There is no such thing as interrupting the stream, my dude. This is an educational stream, and the goal is to get you guys less afraid of Lightroom and Photoshop. For people who want to get into photography, for people who like this stuff but find it a little bit intimidating, you guys are in the right place. And the more questions you ask, the more I get to talk and answer questions, and that helps somebody out. Patch tool. Zoom, enhance. We'll do this last one as well. Patch tool right here. We'll just grab all that. That's not going to be good. We'll use the clone stamp here. And clone stamp this out. Hard to say how really visible that is. Brand new layer. Burn tool. Holding Alt while I have the dodge tool selected, we are going to make that hair just darker. Blend in 80%. Scoot back. Zoom, enhance. Okay, looks like we need to go a little bit more. I'm going to zoom out a little bit for this. Brand new layer again. Burn tool. Is this nitpicking? You bet your ass it is. Is nitpicking what we do here? Also, you bet. There we go. Zoom. Enhance. Good. All right. Brand new layer. Back to our patch tool. Spot healing brush. At this point now, we're going to zip around the photo. We want to keep as many of her little freckles as we can, but sometimes freckles look like zits, so we're going to err on the side of caution and zap them out. The smaller the brush stroke when using the spot healing brush, the more reliable your results will be. So sometimes you'll just see me tapping in an area using tiny, tiny little brush strokes to get the desired result. Much easier to do with a pen and tablet than it is to do with a mouse. The other reason, here's why editing with a tablet is superior to editing with a mouse. If I'm using my paintbrush here, see how big my brush is? If I push very delicately, I can get a really fine line or a thick, fat line, right? With the mouse, all I get is a fat line. I have no pressure control. So for me, it's often easier when I'm working with the spot healing brush to have a rather large brush, but push very delicately so that I only have a very thin brush stroke. And if you're editing with a touchpad, God help you. That's got to be tough. Now, I also realize that tablets are not free, nor are they given away at the corner, and budget is a limiting factor for a lot of people, so make do the best you can with what you've got. But if you've got some money and can afford a tablet, and you are interested in photography and photo retouching, get a tablet. Get a tablet with a jog wheel on it, and you will love it. It took me 2 photos to master the learning curve of using a tablet comfortably. Spend some time on the forehead. Don't linger too long in an area. You'll end up fixing too many things that you don't really need to fix. Probably a birthmark. Looks weird. It's gone. That was the patch tool. Now we're back to the spot healing brush. Now, you guys remember me telling you that the dodge and burn tool does fucking work? We're about to get to that point. All right, brand new layer. Switch to dodge and burn. We're running it at midtones at 5%. Now, for those of you who are brand new to photo editing, you're going to see the little doodad moving around. You're going to see my brush moving, but it will be difficult to see exactly what is changing until we flip this layer on and off, and then you will be like, holy fuck, what the hell just happened? The dodge tool, or the burn tool, is the closest thing Photoshop has to a magic eraser that exists in retouching. It is also super fucking boring. It is a grind. The more time you spend dodging and burning your photos, the better your skin will look. Primarily portraits. You know, not a ton of dodging and burning needs to be done on landscapes, unless you're really going for some crazy effects. But way back in the day, and now we come to the sinister part of the stream, I fucking hate editing. I hate retouching. All this stuff you're seeing right now, I don't enjoy it. I don't enjoy it one goddamn bit. I do like streaming, though. And I am such a selfish piece of shit that I enjoy making you guys suffer with me. And I don't mind talking the whole time. It's so nice having you guys hanging out while editing. And if you guys learn something from this, that's cool. Why do I have many layers while doing this? Because each of those layers not only represents a different tool, but also usually a different opacity. So like some of the layers were done at 100%, others were done at 80%. We're reducing the boredom levels. It's not just that, right? It's like I understand that I have a lot of experience in this field and I enjoy teaching. I really sincerely enjoy teaching, and I really sincerely enjoy hanging out with you guys. I like teaching. I like streaming. Okay, so we have dodged and burned quite a bit. There's still a little bit more to go. I'm going to finish dodging and burning before we turn this layer on and off, and then you'll see exactly what's going on with all of this. Spend some time on the forehead and nose now. Big burn down the center of her nose. We're going to try and limit how much of that skin is pure shiny white. Come back to the forehead now, and we're just kind of squiggling around, evening out these textures. Okay, so here's what we just did. This is all dodging and burning, just to even out our skin tones. And I blended it in. This whole layer is at 60%. And here's where we started. Here's where we are now. Now we're going to use that same method. We're going to change our brush to screen. Transparent layer. Now we are going to paint over areas where we've heavily dodged and burned to restore some skin tone. Color blending mode. See right here under her eyes? You can barely see the color difference, and Twitch does not do a good job of showing color. But you can see that there's a little change right here from gray to skin tone. Another transparent layer. We're going to grab more good skin tone, and I'm just going to go over her whole forehead and knock back a little bit of that shine. We're going to add some skin tone on the nose as well. Similarly, I'm going to grab a redder hue and hit her chin to knock out some of this yellow. Blend that one in, 75%. Here's where we started. Here's where we are now. Let's do the eyes. Grab our brush, set it back to 100%. Alt-Shift-N sets your brush back to normal. And then just type in 100%. Brand new full information layer. Alt-click the layer mask button, / key to see where our mask is. And now we're just going to get the colored portion of her eye. Both eyes. Switch to a black brush by hitting the X key. And we're going to paint out her pupils. We don't want to change those. And now we're going to clean up our mask. We don't want to be changing her eyelids or anything of the sort. Okay, click back on the layer. Control M, open up the curve. And we are going to drastically brighten her eyes between the midtones and the shadows. As a result, you now have silly clown eyes that look photoshopped. Control J, copy that. Set the layer blending mode to soft light. Blend to taste. The soft light layer will be 33%. The brightness layer will be 40%. And that's what it looks like. I also see a couple last stray hairs right here. We can grab the whole chunk of eyebrow. That may actually be a little bit trickier than I'm giving it credit. There we go. One more little stray right across here. All patch tool. Patchy patch. Quick spot heal. Big chunks of patch tool now. I'm going to grab just some of these little transparent, almost transparent hairs. Before, after. Same girl, same face. You know, we haven't changed the shape of her nose. We haven't fucked with her eye color to give her brown eyes when she has blue eyes. We aren't radically changing anything. We're just cleaning up her skin. Brand new layer. We're grabbing our spot healing brush again, and I'm just going to zip around and make sure there aren't any glaringly obvious disasters going on elsewhere in this shot. But for the most part, it looks pretty good. You know, she has clear skin, which makes my job significantly easier. Get rid of some of the hair tie lines. Here we can use the patch tool and just zoobity bop. Ooh. A little bit of the spot healing brush as well. Fingers look good. Outfit's a little wrinkled. Not too upset about that. We'll just patch in a new section right there. Good. Legs look fine. They're pretty much invisible. Hand looks fine. By the way, I'm holding the space bar and just surfing around. That's all retouching is cleaning up all the little details. It's not about doing huge changes to your subject. You know, I'm not going to make her skinnier. I'm not going to waste any time with that. Really, the only big changes come in terms of contrast, color, stuff like that. But retouching is the accumulation of all the little fixes. Here we're using the dodge tool just to get rid of some of the blotchiness in the skin. Again, she has fairly clear skin. We don't really have to do too much about it. We'll blend that in at 55% and add another color layer to hide our tracks. It's looking pretty good. Let's work on global contrast. Contrast time. Now, I have several actions related to contrast. All of these actions are very, very simple adjustments to the curve. For example, brighten the midtones means that I'm bumping the curve that much. That tiny little bit. Right? And that's a pain in the ass to have to do over and over and over again. So I made it an action, right? Or the contrast one is just barely bumping our highlights and barely dropping our shadows, right? That's contrast. That's still adding a little bit of S-bend into our curve, but in tiny little increments, right? And so if you want to stack contrast, you can do it that way. It's easier once you understand how curves work to make actions so that you don't have to keep adjusting the curve for common changes. Is there a real good photo ever taken, or are all good pictures most likely enhanced? For what I do, no one has flawless skin. If you were to see this girl out in the world where she is moving at a normal speed and you look at her and you're like, whoa, that girl's hot. And then you keep walking without saying anything because that's rude to say something. She doesn't care about your opinion. You get what I'm saying? If you were just to see her as a human being out in the world, you would be like, that human is gorgeous. But when you freeze a human being in place at a 4,000th of a second, in that 4,000th of a second, you realize that everyone has bags under the eyes. Everyone has blemishes. Everyone has little creases and wrinkles in their skin. And if we clean those up, this is still the same girl on her most perfect day. And that's the goal. So, is there any photo that really never gets retouched? Not really. But some photos get retouched more heavily than others. But you can always tweak the contrast, right? And that's not just editing for the sake of editing. Can I show one of the best portraits that I love? On the website. This girl, I love these two shots. This was a cool project. These are just lick and stick leatherworking spikes. This portrait right here, I have gotten a lot of miles out of. These two, actually. Gotten a lot of miles out of them. One of my favorite, like, just from the black and whites, right? Not even touching the colors. Probably way up there. This whole project, I love. This was shot several years ago at this point, but this project went viral, and not viral like a couple people saw it on Reddit. Like, if you Google if you Google Mike Larimore, you get blogs for 10 pages. Yeah, we're on page 5 of Google results, and we're still in the blogosphere. 10 pages deep? Uh-oh. Crazy Russian link? Let's see if it ever loads. I'm just going to move this off to the side. Oh, just kidding. Here it is. In Russian, right? 10 pages deep, and it's still coming up. So, like, this project went worldwide viral. And that was really fucking cool. Because I put a lot... I mean, you have to think about it. 16 beauty retouches per board. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 boards. A lot of work. A lot of work went into that. Not to mention the shooting. So, thank fuck it paid out. Because that brought a lot of attention to the website. It brought in a lot of work. Was tremendously helpful for my career. Okay, contrast time. Here's what I'm going to do. What I just added was a curve where all the blacks have been made grayer by sliding the very edge of the curve up 10 points, but then bringing the shadows back down and the highlights back up. And what this is doing is it's graying out the photo a little bit. It's crushing all these distinct shadows and making them kind of a grayer blob. And if I do it again, we are graying out the already grayed blob, so it's exponential, if that makes sense. We are fixing the fix of the original, not just doing it twice. And I'm going to fade the top one to 25. I'm going to bump the shadows, just that little bit on the curve. One little bump in the shadow portion of the curve. I'm going to do it again and fade that back to 33. Then I'm going to run regular contrast without the black point adjustment. Fade that to 75. Then I'm going to fade the whole layer to 70. How did I come up with those numbers? Experience. Kind of guessing, kind of feeling. Before contrast, after contrast. Going to go in here to my levels. I'm going to make the whole photo a tiny bit darker. She was getting a little bit bright on the skin, and I didn't want that. But what I'm going to do, I made the whole photo darker. I'm going to come in here with a circle gradient with black, and I'm going to keep her eyes light. What's wrong with... we have a lot of, like, non-NA people in here. You're not the only Russian in here, but welcome. We got a lot of Swedes, too. Like, half my chat is people from Scandinavia. This photo, as it is just about done. There are a couple things I want to do. I'm going to come in here to the hue and saturation. I'm going to grab the yellow channel and grab the eyedropper and click, while holding shift, all of this yellow on her arm. I'm going to hold Alt now, and I'm going to click everywhere that's red, or where I like her skin tone. You'll notice now that you're from Iran or you're in Iran watching this. I realize Scandinavia is more than just Sweden, Helldog. Notice that we're only working with a tiny little bit of yellow. And I'm just going to make her skin a tiny bit less yellow. But that changed quite a bit more of the photo, so we're gonna paint it on. You're in Iran. That's a first. I don't know if I have had any other Iranian viewers before. I think the Middle East as a whole is sorely underrepresented on Twitch. North America, plenty of us. But Middle East and South America and like Africa, pretty much no one on Twitch. But yeah, Middle East, Africa, and South America are really underrepresented on Twitch, and I think that's a bummer. Except for Brazil. There are a lot of Brazilian streamers. Now let's have some fun. We've got everything in this photo completely finished. If we called it here, that would be totally fine. Now it comes down to color work and how much extra we want to do on all the extra little things. Headshot, thanks for that follow. For example, I'm going to filter, other, high pass, 6 pixels, soft light. What did that do? It brought out a lot of details. I'm going to make a black layer mask, and with a white brush at 100%, I'm going to paint the lace pattern on her dress. To pull out some contrast and some detail on that. Now let's work on some color. Identifying color in a photo can be tricky. So I'm going to grab my brush and I'm going to click while holding Alt and see what colors we're dealing with. Up here, we've got a lot of blues. Here, I think this one's pretty obvious. We've got a lot of greens and yellows. I'm going to run a purple gradient back in the mountains. I'm going to run a teal gradient here in my meadow and a little bit back in here. I'm going to run a green gradient here in my dark bushes. And I'm going to run a red gradient in little pops of color where I see some of the bush poking through. Now let's fade all that back. The red, little hint, 25%. The green, we don't want it that strong at all, 10%. Maybe 15 if we're feeling crazy. The teal, 33%. The purple, 33%. And now what we're left with is all these little pops and extra hints of color without it being too aggressive, right? And now we can come in here. We can grab a purple gold gradient. And just hit underneath her hat. To give a little bit of split tone. I think the blue is too much. That up there, we didn't even touch it. That's the original photo. Are you talking about in the top right corner? Camera right? Yeah, that's the original photo. Adding just a tiny bit of split toning it doesn't match. What's it supposed to match, though, is the question. Just that little bit of purple to give our light a little bit of character. So here's where we started. Here's where we are now. If we wanted to adjust the blue in the corner, we can do a trick called luminosity masking, where we set our photo to black and white, and then switch our layer to luminosity. And we could tweak all the cyans and blues. I mean, you get control over the whole channel. You know, so this is how you get your like sweet dark orange skin and bright sky. That looks fine. Really though, what we can do is we can bump up the blues. Bump up the cyans to boot. That looks a little bit better. Not quite so saturated now. Same trick we did earlier. What I'm going to do, filter, other, high pass, okay, soft light. I'm going to grab a brush at 55% now, and I'm going to soft light. I'm going to high pass some of these wild grass buddies. Just to pull out a little bit of sharpness in there. It's going to be difficult to see. That's off. That's on. Last thing I'm going to do to this photo, with a diamond gradient, I'm going to come in here where all these little shadows in the bush are, and I'm just going to hit them with some contrast. And the reason I'm doing this is to help separate our subject from the middle ground and help separate the middle ground from the background of this photo. And then blend that in, 60%. Drawn to the patch of sky. I mean, to be fair, it is bright. So what we can do, let's not fuss about it here. This photo and all the technical changes are done. Here's where we started. Here's where we are now. And up close on the face, here's where we started. Here's where we are now. We'll flatten this bad boy and save it. I don't mind the blue, but ultimately what we need to determine, do I know the software 3D LUT creator or lookup table creator? Yes, but I have never used it. I have heard of it, but never used it. Ultimately, the question is, what if we crop it out? Are we losing any critical information by cropping that out? I don't think so. We're still very nicely framed on our subject. We're losing a little bit of this. We're losing a little bit of the mountain. So, like, you know, let's cut it as close as we can. But if you ask me, I think that looks fine. Is it a technique that people take photos and draw characters only shin up, not having the lower legs? For a shot like this, it's cropped at the thighs because everything below her is just a bunch of grass. And since she is standing on that grass and it's like we're in the middle of a field, she's also wearing flip-flops. So, and they're not like cute flip-flops, they're just regular ass flip-flops. So there's no reason people need to see that part. It's like too much noise in the photo. It's not about be careful with that word noise because that means something in photography. But it's like, is there any part, like, is seeing her legs a critical part of the photo, or do we want to see like the face? Right? And so, you know, typically the face is the most important part of a portrait. We're going to make sure that looks best. And then seeing her like seeing her standing in like waist high grass with flip-flops just would not look as pretty. You know, here, for example, the grass is so high that it's just covering. What if she had stilettos? Then she would look insanely out of place wearing stilettos in a grass field. Here, her feet aren't cropped. They're just hidden. Actually, no, they are cropped. I take that back. I don't mind the blue sky, but it is really all personal preference. Either way, though, there is room with this photo to crop, and it looks good either way. And ultimately, it's like kind of whatever you think is right. And by you, I mean me. Whatever I think is right, since they are my images and like how I represent my brand. But ultimately, after a long time, I shot all these photos. Everything I edit on this stream, I took the photos myself, including the drone stuff. And just for kicks, since we have a great audience in here right now, I will show you the other side of the business that I do, which is the drone side of things. Check this out, though. This is the other side of the business that I run. And I run the drone stuff with my wife. That's pretty neat, eh? Put them 4K on YouTube. They are 4K on YouTube already. So, my wife, I convinced her to start streaming her video editing. She does all the videos for the drone company. Give her a follow at Hannah Dawn. Where is that in Colorado? That is Lower Cataract Lake. I put it out in chat for you if you want to Google it. And all the videos are on milehighaerialmedia.com in the videos section for your viewing pleasure. And we've got more than just that up there. Let's do one more full edit. I'm going to crop this down. I am going to crop the bridge out, actually. Drop the exposure a tiny bit. Bump the shadows. And now the question is, how did you get all that yellow in the photo? That's just flowers in front of the lens. That's in the photo itself. That's not Photoshop or any sort of trickery. That's just holding a flower petal in front of the lens. This photo is now all ready. And you see how quickly it all went. Lightroom is already done. We're ready for Photoshop here. Control J, copy your background layer. First step, always. Before I start editing this photo, I really have to pee because I've been holding it in since we started the stream. And I think what I'm going to do is pull up one more cool drone video for you guys. And while I'm peeing, you can see that. So that's like the business side of the drone company, right? Like the mountains and the waterfalls are pretty and everything like that, but the charity golf tournaments and stuff, that is where the like business side comes into things. Let's get back to editing. We just opened up this photo. We have not touched anything about it yet. For those of you who are just getting here, the yellow from something like this is from a flower petal in front of the lens, right? You can get really, really cool effects just by putting something directly in front of the camera. For example, you know, here, basic ass webcam, but as soon as I put my phone up, all of a sudden you can get a cool mirroring effect. And that sort of trick, you know, imagine if we're mirroring like that, right? And so you can do some really cool things with pieces of glass in front of the lens, with prisms, with flower petals, anything that adds color. You can do a whole hell of a lot with to illustrate exactly what I'm talking about. And it works with anything. It works for your selfies on your cell phone, but just a little flower petal like that. Now, if this is right up here and there's sun hitting it, I'm going to see if I can pull this off. No, that's just fucking with the webcam's exposure. You get the idea though, right? Like having a blob like that cutting across your lens will get you pretty crazy colors. So that's just to illustrate that it's not all shenanigans and filters. First things first, clone stamp, we're going to cut these stray leaves out. Catalisat? Cat Alisat? Yeah, drones are banned in a lot of places. For good reason. For security reasons, for risk to the public of some idiot crashing his drone into them. There are a lot of reasons why drones should be banned at public events. Now we're using our patch tool just to clean up the area where we clone stamped. Just like that. Those are gone. Even if there are tiny little artifacts up in here, probably nothing that we really need to worry about. It looks like we've got a little bit of a blob right there. Now it's gone. I mean, at least in the US, they are relaxing. They are relaxing a lot of the regulations, not tightening them. Next, we're going to switch to our spot healing brush and just start cleaning up some of the skin. This is great for all the little nicks and bumps and cuts and bruises and scars and scabs. Switch to our patch tool and get rid of this light gooby, whatever the fuck that was. And the question that always comes up is, how do you know whether to remove a thing or whether it is like part of her face? Practice, experience. Sometimes you get it wrong, but on the whole, you know, is she going to miss that freckle? Nuh-uh. She's not. She doesn't even know it's there to begin with. Generally, you want to leave like truly distinguishing details. You know, if she has like a Cindy Crawford mole, like right here, you want to leave that one in, right? Or if she's got like a fucking sweet scar right there, you want to leave that bad boy in because, man, that's sick. But for the most part, if you can't tell whether or not it's a pimple when you're looking at the full resolution image, pull it out. Because when people see this image on your website that big, they're not going to be able to know either. So err on the side of caution. And if you think it's a gooby, pull it out. Patch tool now. We're going to clean up some of the dry skin on her lips. Am I using a tablet? Yes. Editing on a tablet is essential. For anyone who's curious what tablet I use, what camera I use, stuff like that, it's all there in that gear list. That was updated recently, so it is current. It's a little bit blinding with all that yellow. But that also really obscures quite a lot of the little details. Let's do another quick trick first. So if you'll notice, the skin on her hands over here on the shadow side is purple. It's not just that it's missing color, it's that maybe her hand is cold. Also, it's a little bit in shadow. It's a little bit purple. So what we can do is run an adjustment layer called Photo Filter. I'm going to crank this up to 40%. We'll click on our mask. We'll invert it. And I'm going to grab a brush at 100%. Actually, we'll keep it at 55%. And we're just going to color out the top of her hand here. And then hit it again. Since we're at 55%, we'll go over it a couple times to get closer to 100% coverage. And just like that. Now we're a little bit closer with our skin color. Another trick. Here, I'm going to grab the red channel, Alt-3, and I'm going to click on all these kind of blotchy areas in her thigh. Then I'm going to hold Alt, and I'm going to click all this really saturated yellow skin. Notice that we're working really with the reds, and we'll adjust the hue until it's a little bit more yellow, and I'm going to bump the saturation as well. Invert that mask. Same technique now. Just paint the whole area, and that will help neutralize some of those colors. I'm going to do it again. This time I'm going to grab both the reds, because it looks like we didn't get all of it. And I'm also going to grab the magentas and see if it's considering some of that magenta. Now, the last little bit of those lines, we can use the dodge tool to remove this kind of thing. Oh, sorry, headshot, I missed that. Yes, that would be focus stacking, or shooting at a lower aperture. Like if you're shooting at f11, you're going to get more detail in both your foreground and your background. This was shot at f1.8. So she is really the only thing that's sharp, and everything else is just completely blurred out depth of field. Brand new full information layer. And now we're going to start dodging. And if need be, the dodge tool, you know, if you really need to get some fine detail, the dodge tool, you know, you can run it at 1 pixel, get in here right where there are these really fine lines. What are we at? We're at 3 pixels now, just to dodge some of those bad boys out. You don't typically need to do that, especially for a photo where everything is insanely blown out like this. But you certainly have that option of dodging fine lines at very high detail. So we're still working with the dodge tool now, just evening out skin tones. We'll run that at 50% on the face. Just a little bit of cleanup. But then let's come down here to the leg. Brand new layer. And we're going to start dodging out some of this blotchy skin. And this is going to make a huge difference. It's not going to look like we're changing anything really, but when we flip it on and off, you'll be able to see a very clear difference. A higher aperture number, like f8, f11, you're going to get significantly more detail out of your backgrounds. But for me, since it's a portrait, I really only care that the subject looks good. Unless you're shooting what could be called an environmental portrait. Let's say you're shooting a baker at his bakery counter, then you're going to want to see some more detail, right? So maybe 5.6 up to f8. You're going to want to see, you know, the things behind the baker as well, so that your shot of the baker is in context to what she does. All right. Blend that in, 66%. That's just dodging and burning on her legs to get her skin tones even. Now we can run a screen brush with some of this good skin color and really finish out the legs. Kind of knock out all that cold skin purple. Here, I'm going to grab some of this green and then skin tone up here. Run that at color blending mode. And now the leg looks so much better. I'm going to do kind of a similar trick on the hand. We're going to run another screen brush layer. I'm going to get some of this really saturated brown. And then we're going to fade it into... Oh, I don't really have much other good skin color I can use. Maybe some of this lighter sunlit brown. Then I spilled over into the edges a little bit, so I'm just going to use my eraser, clean that up. We don't want to change the suit too much. Color blending mode. And then run that at like 66%. That looks pretty damn good. Next, filter, other, high pass. I'm going to hit her bathing suit with a high pass filter to pull out more detail in the lace. And this is going to make the bathing suit really pop. But we don't want to just run it over the whole photo because high pass tends to make skin look really weird. So we want to be pretty precise with our mask. And we'll come up here, we'll get the top part as well. Now, do we have to be so nitpicky that we go back into every individual ring? No. What I don't want, though, is like this, right? So here's what that looks like. All right, contrast time. First, what I'm going to do, I'm going to make the whole photo a little bit darker. Now I'm going to add some contrast. Then we'll blend that in 75%. Now let's say we look at this photo and we're like, you know what? That yellow is pretty aggressive. Right? Or like maybe that green is too aggressive. So what I'm going to do is invert the entire photo and grab the counter to that yellow, which is going to be a blue purple. We can take just a transparent layer and cut across like that and soft light it. And that's going to neutralize a little bit of our yellow. This is before purple, after purple. Right? It's like there's no way we're going to get rid of it completely. But we can certainly, give her face a fighting chance so that it's not completely swallowed up by yellow flower. Right here on her shoulder, I see there's a pretty gnarly vein right there that I'm going to work on in a minute, but I'm going to try and neutralize some of that green as well. Okay, here I think we can do quite a bit with the spot healing brush, and anything we don't get, we can come back in one more layer and hit it with the dodge tool to get rid of all the last little blotches in the skin. Yeah. So we'll pull out a lot of the like lines and patches and stuff like that, and then everything else we'll just take a fairly large dodge brush and hit some of these little shadowy blotch sections. And then one last color brushing. Good. Now, we don't have to do anything to her eyes in this photo. They are already completely sunlit. If you were to Photoshop her eyes, it would just look ridiculous, and there's no real reason to do it. However, for the sake of a tutorial, and just to do science and see, let's edit her eyes. Black layer mask. We'll hit the backslash key to show where our layer is. Hit X so that we switch. Never do this thing and then you do it. Yeah, I mean, people got to learn. So we're masking off her eyes right now, but we only want the colored portion. I don't want to change her pupils or anything else about her eye. We're just going to work on the color. Control M, open up the curve. We're just going to give these the tiniest little bump. Control J, we're going to soft light them. Oh yeah, see, that's what I was afraid of. I'm running these at 10 and 15%. The tiniest little changes. Barely visible. I really don't want to overcook the eyes in this. Color time. This is where it gets fun. I am going to hit the entire camera right side with some purple. And that is going to beautifully contrast the yellow, but I really don't want her to have super purple skin. I only want to see it on her suit. And a little bit in the hair. Let's get some teal going on. We'll hit the river with this. A little bit in the sky up here too. Not really going to be too much opportunity for red. Maybe just a little bit over here. Maybe throw a couple of pops in over here. Doesn't look like that's really coming through though. And then the green, I'm actually going to reverse this and really pump up the green. Not the green that's on her, because I don't really want to touch that, but we'll just accentuate it everywhere else. So the green will run at 66%. The red will run at 40%. The teal, 66. And the purple, 55. Alright, looks like that red's a little bit too aggressive. We'll do 33. And the purple will run at 66. That looks damn good. I'm going to make a new adjustment layer. And edit the curve. Just going to darken. I'm going to run a tube gradient right down the middle. Her legs are fine. I just want her midsection to be a little bit less blown out. It's pretty aggressively blown out. Then I'm going to hit this bag under the eye one more time with the dodge tool. I reckon we're done here. Here's where we started. Here's where we are now. And on the one hand, you're like, well, it kind of looks the same. It just one half seems different. And you're probably right. But it's all the little things, right? It's cleaning up the skin on her thigh. Making sure that it's not absolutely bespeckled with blotch marks and stuff like that. It's normalizing the color on her hand so that it doesn't look like dead skin. It's pulling out bags under the eyes and knocking out zits on her forehead and nose and things like that. And then maybe part of it is just making sure that everything looks okay and not doing much. Flatten it. We'll call it there. Come back into Lightroom. Just double check, make sure everything looks all right. Looks good to me. Get rid of the old one. So here are our two finished photos from the day. Basic tools, no crazy plugins, no paid peripherals for Photoshop, like no paid plugins, nothing like that. The simple stuff. Keep it simple. Clone stamp, spot healing brush, patch tool, dodge and burn. 4 tools. And then I guess paintbrush and mask if you want to get into that stuff. The rest is just grinding away at all the little details until you, the photographer, are satisfied that the photo looks done. And if there's something that is still nagging you about a photo and you can't tell what it is, or if there's something that's nagging you that you cannot fix with those tools, then that's when you go to YouTube to search for a specific tutorial on how to fix X, Y, or Z. Now keep in mind as well, for everything that I have shown you guys today, there are a bajillion different ways to do this. My way is a way that I have been doing for several years, and there are always new things to learn. There are always new techniques that may do what you do better, faster, more efficiently, whatever it is. So for any of these things, it comes down to practice, patience, and that's really the only thing separating what I do from someone who just picks up Facebook, Photoshop. I have a lot of practice. And is my way the only way to get good-looking results from photos? Absolutely not. So experiment around. Be patient, though. This stuff does not come overnight, and a lot of the things that I do and take for granted and things that look easy may, in fact, be quite a struggle. And don't lose confidence in your own abilities, and don't get discouraged. Because, again, if you want to become a famous composer, you must first write a single note. Yes, Cats, I hear you. I know you're hungry. I don't actually care. That's going to do it for me, guys. To everyone who followed and subscribed, thank you so much. If you have questions, tweet at me. If you want to keep up with my work, Instagram is the best place for that. If you want to keep up with the stream, Twitter is the best place for that. So long, guys. Have a good one. Keep shooting. We'll see you next time.